Thank you. Very good morning again. How are you today? Feeling good? How many of you have been to New Zealand? Raise your hand. How many of you have been to Portugal? Some people, yeah. How many have you been to Brazil? We have a presenter from Brazil later on. 1, 2. Paraguay? Right. How many of you have felt in the last 20 years some deep feelings of happiness? How many times have you been, feeling happy or unhappy? Be honest. Raise your hands. More people feeling happy or unhappy than been to Brazil or been to Paraguay. So this is, economics without borders. So if happiness is not without borders, you tell me what's without borders, right? Borders are not only about geographic borders, also about scientific borders and many other borders. So I'll be speaking about the pursuit of happiness. And by the way, we're talking about cultural differences, right? How do you, expect to hand a business card to somebody in Japan? Well, talking about differences, and my name is not Jorge, my name is Jorge, or in Portuguese, Jorge. So if you want to spell it right, Jorge is in Spanish, right? But Jorge is okay, it's in English. But if you try harder, it's Jorge, which is kind of weird. It's the same problem I have when I try to say names in Polish. Very oftentimes, I'm not able to do it. Yeah, it's just the way, So, first of all, I'd like to thank the invitation to be here. It's my first time in Katowice. I don't think even you say Katowice, it's Katowice. Katowice, right? Katowice. So it's my first time here. I'm very happy to be here. Very happy to be here because one of the things I find very interesting in life is to go abroad. Just be as a tourist or as just somebody delivering these speeches, I find this a very interesting thing in my life. So I'll be talking about happiness, and I'll be trying to show you how happiness is interesting for almost all areas in science, not only economics. But we'll start with economics. And then we'll dig into different areas, including religion, which was already mentioned here, arts, science, and then I will introduce you to a slightly different way of thinking about happiness. As the presenter said, I work in the School of Economics and Management in Portugal. We have many students from Poland there. I teach Polish students too. And one of the things that I found so far very interesting is how fast you Polish students learn Portuguese. I don't know why, because our languages are so different. But for some reason, you have this, this ability to learn our language. And when you do that, you immerse yourselves in our society. And when you immerse yourselves in our society, you get to see the nice things that we have there. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the pursuit of happiness and from what we call the ideal to the subjective perspective of happiness. Happiness is something that everybody knows a little bit about. Everybody has experienced moments of happiness, moments of contentment, but also moments of not so much happiness. Okay? So, if we are to believe in what Blaise Pascal said, everybody is pursuing happiness in their lives. I mean, look, I didn't wake up this morning and started wondering, how can I be happy? What is happiness? You just don't believe those things. You don't think about those things early in the morning, do you? I mean, it's okay if you think about happiness in the morning, but usually people are more practical oriented, aren't we? Just brush our teeth, just go to the toilet, have our breakfast, and so on. It's not something that is in your mind all the time. But for sure, everybody in this room, without any exception, already thought on how we can be happy, or even more precisely, happier. Because happy is not about 0 or 1, black or white. It's about the scale. It's about the continuum. You can be more or less happy. So, oops, where did it go? Okay. So these are the questions, right, that drive everybody. Believe it or not, it's one of the most important quests in life, right? What is happiness and how can one be happy? And, you know, I don't know what with the previous presenters saw, but I'm looking at all of you, and he's going to teach me, he's going to tell me how I can be happy. I hope I can respond to those deep questions that you have. Okay, first of all, let me give you the generic context. Happiness has been there forever. Interestingly, only in the last 40 to 50 years, it's been dealt with science, biology, psychology, but also management and economics have been looking at happiness. Only in the last 40 to 50 years. But it has been there forever. And I'll start with these 3 examples. In 1972, King Jigme Wangchuk from Bhutan, he introduced the concept of GNH, gross national happiness. He said that it's a much better concept than the concept of GDP, because it's a multidimensional concept. It includes 9 dimensions, from health to education, from income to many other things. The concept of GDP in economics is relatively not so wide. So he said this is a more holistic approach to life. And up to today, they're still using this concept. Another evolution of how happiness is becoming more important in our societies, that came from the United Nations in 2012. They produced the World Happiness Report. And look at the numbers that I got from 2022. Finland is the happiest country in the world. Then New Zealand, it's the 10th happiest country in the world. Australia, the 12th, and Poland is the 48th happiest country in the world. And Portugal is the 56th happiest country in the world. Maybe maybe I'm the exception here. I look happy. Don't I look happy to you? Yeah? You see, but I'm Portuguese, and the reasons why we are not so happy as the Finnish people, I have no idea. But the fact is that we are not very well in that, in that ranking. And finally, you also find happiness in arts, in movies, in books. I mean, there are so many self-help books out there, all about happiness. How can you be, happier in life? So the economics of happiness, because it exists as an area in economics, is huge. Multi-billion-dollar economy. Lots of things happening, lots of money to do, to make with the economics of happiness. Many different areas. I would stimulate you, if, of course, you want to pursue economics, to dig in, explore this particular area in economics. But then we also have happiness in religion and philosophy. Take a look at these examples. In Zoroastrianism, which is one of the oldest faiths in the world, in fact, it's previous to Islam, previous to Christianity, and previous to Judaism. How can you become happy? Well, you become happy when you unite yourself with the ultimate God, with the supreme God. So, but how do you do it? How do you get there? There is a way. Yeah? You have to have good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, meaning good actions. So there is this catch. If you look at the three Abrahamic religions, it's pretty similar. All of them say there is a catch to be happy, right? You have to follow these commandments. You have to follow these principles if you want to pursue happiness. And then you go on, and you find a similar way of thinking in both Buddhism and Hinduism, although it's different. For example, in Buddhism, happiness is achieved by removing all sources of desire or suffering. Only then you can achieve, only then you can, aim at becoming happy. And then, you go on in philosophy. Aristotle, happiness is the ultimate purpose of human existence. That's what we all aim for. And finally, in Confucianism, you see happiness as the development of good character. What these things have in common, you see, is that you have to follow certain paths. You have to follow certain ways. You have to abide to a few principles if you want to be happy. Follow our rules, and you will be happy in the future. That's what all these different perspectives, religions have in common. Interestingly, that reasoning doesn't change when we move to scientific perspectives. Take a look at, first one, biology. Very recently, in 2020, I think, a couple of researchers found that happiness has genetic roots. How interesting is this? They say that about 30 to 40% of differences in people, in terms of happiness, are due to the genetics. Which is, how can I put it? I mean, it's written in your genetic code, right? If you're bound to be unhappy, I'm afraid maybe you can't do much. And if you're bound to be happy, you can kind of, right, that's fine. That's fine. I have a good set of genes. And then there's also this interesting research going on with these 4 happy hormones. They are the hormones responsible for things like good mood, pleasure, removal of pain, and so on. But then also, the context matters a lot. Kim was telling you about the differences in cultural contexts, right? So we believe that happiness also depends on different contexts. The way, maybe, I don't know, but the way the Polish people overall, collectively, define happiness, maybe it's different from the way collectively we, the Portuguese, define happiness. But the more different the culture, the more likely to define and redefine happiness in different ways. And the same in terms of time. What we defined as happiness thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, maybe not the same as we define happiness now. There's this interesting concept of blue zones. Have you ever heard about blue zones concept? They are the places where people live happy forever. It looks like the end of a movie, right? Like people live happily forever. There are a couple of places in the world where people do live up to their 100 and plus more years, but they live healthy. They live, and happy too. Places like, for example, if I can remember correctly, there one place in Greece where the average age is like 95 years old. Another one in Japan, and another one in Italy, And when you study those blue zones, you find interesting communalities. They live long, all of them, but at the same time, they have a community that helps them to go through things. They eat, good, they have good diets, they exercise, and so on and so forth. Which means that although there are biological roots in terms of how people can be happy or unhappy, we can do something about it. To live longer and to live in a happier way. And finally, there is also the psychology of happiness. I have no idea what you're studying. You are in the moment of taking those big decisions in life, aren't you? You're coming here, maybe you're coming to different universities and you're listening to different presentations. How many of you have decided to come to economics? Don't record this now. How many of you have decided to come to economics? Okay. Are the other ones still undecided, or you already decided to go to some other places? Hey? Well, psychology is an interesting field. It crosses marketing. You're also from a psychology background. It crosses marketing, it crosses economics, it crosses management, and so on. And all these different concepts come from psychology with applications into all these different areas, including the economics field. I think it was already one of you two that also talked about the meaning of life and why are we here. Anyway, so again, what all these things have in common is, again, they teach you how to be happy. They advise you how to be happy. They give you recommendations on how to be happy. You just have to follow this particular set of rules, either religious, either philosophical perspectives, either scientific ones, or whatever, right? We can't say these are wrong or right. They are good advices, right? They are good recommendations, and they also are the collective knowledge of people that lived longer than you, right? And as such, they know about how to become happy. Having said that, if happiness really depends on the context, then I was wondering while I was preparing this presentation, what makes Z generation, the millennials, happy? You. And I found this. So this is Maslow's pyramid with its 5 first levels. And then, for those who don't know about Maslow's pyramid, it's basically about 5 levels of needs that we all have, and we function so that we fulfill all our needs, right? So apparently in the millennials, we have all these different technologies fulfilling our basic needs, from the physiological needs to the safety needs and the belonging and the esteem and self-actualization needs. So it's all about using technology. I'm not sure if this is right or wrong. I've never conducted any research checking what makes millennials happy or less happy. But for sure, this is an interesting portrait and, of course, a provocating portrait of what makes you guys happy. Now, what you don't know, maybe, is that towards the end of his life, Maslow published a couple of papers, and he introduced a 6th level that rarely people teach in universities because they've never read those last papers of Maslow. And he proposed a 6th level, which goes beyond us, goes beyond all those different needs. He called it self-transcendence needs. So what you do to go beyond your individual needs, because all the first 5 are about you. But self-transcendence needs is about others. What do we do to please others? What do we do to make the world a better world? Now, about that, I didn't find anything that could relate to that in terms of the millennials. So you see, we already know a few things about happiness, but there are many things that we don't know about happiness as seen from the modern, from these recent generations. Yesterday at dinner, we were talking about our kids. I have 2 kids, and and we were sharing our thoughts about how the young generation looks at the world. And one of the things that we agreed on, maybe the only thing, was that you have different ways of thinking about work, of thinking about corporations. By the way, this is also big business, happiness to corporations. And you have a different way to approach work. The way you look at work is not the same way as we look at work. There was also an interesting study published not far ago, maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, that showed that the millennials is the generation that has a different brain, structural differences from the other 4 generations which are working nowadays. We have 5 generations working at this present moment in our corporations. You are the youngest one. You're going to start, working in very few years, if you haven't started already. Your brains, these researchers found, are structurally different from the 4 previous generations. Now, their explanation is that your brains are different because you are operating with technology much more intensively, much more diversely than the 4 generations before you. So if you look at your parents, your grandparents, they're also using technology. We are using technology, but not like you were doing. Like you're doing it in a totally different way. And that, according to these researchers, is the factor, it's the functioning of you working with technology that is causing that brain structural differences when you compare with the 4 other generations. What that is bringing in terms of many things, in terms of how we define friendship, how we define work, what is work, and how do we define happiness, we still do not know. We do not know that, right? Maybe some of you will be researching this in the future. Anyway, I still haven't responded those 2 big questions. Before going to finally respond to those big questions, I will give you a few minutes to read the following questions and sentences. Number 4 there is based on a true story. Okay, an elderly lady. She's got Alzheimer's disease. She no longer can recognize her children, not even her, but she smiles every day, she dances, she sings. She's very happy. So these questions are there to confuse you even more. Because I want to introduce you to a different perspective about happiness now. So far, I've been talking about what others have produced in terms of happiness. But now, it's time to go a bit deeper and try to understand why some people, although they have it all, they have richness, they have material goods, they have what for us looks like a very interesting, fulfilling environment, but still they are not happy. Or it also explains what's coming up. It also explains why some people are very happy despite the fact that they're living under very dramatic circumstances. And it explains quite a lot of other things. Why, for example, some Afghan women can be totally happy despite the fact that for us, what's happening in Afghanistan is totally wrong. And it explains many other things regarding happiness, and by the way, not only about happiness. Many of these concepts can be explained by what's coming ahead. So I'd like to introduce you to these two different ways of looking at happiness. One is happiness as an ideal construct, and the other one is happiness as a subjective experience, a subjective construct. As an idealized construct, happiness is what others have said about what happiness is an ideal, it's an illusion. It doesn't exist, it only exists in our mind as a construction that comes from religion, philosophy, history, culture, our parents, whatever. It exists in the future. It's like, if you do that, you will be happy. So follow those rules, follow those principles. Just, go ahead, and then you will be happy. But only happens in the future. So it's an illusion, but it's a very important illusion. You know why? Because it drives behavior. It drives motives. It drives desire. It drives purpose. So basically, it's something that you construct in your mind according to what you saw in all these things that influence you. But then we have happiness as a subjective experience. That is the real happiness. It's the happiness that you experience now, in the present. And it's highly subjective. It's highly due to your particular personality, your character. And that's why when I ask, how can we be happy? No one can actually tell you how to be happy, because it's your subjective experience that counts. And that kind of happiness is about your emotions, your feelings, and your moods. Both perspectives are equally important, are equally relevant. One, because it drives the way you are aiming at the future, what you want from the future. That's extremely important. How can I be happy? Do I like economics? Would I go to economics? Does it make me happier in the future? Does it bring me money or not? But the other one is what you're going through now. In that particular case, you have options. Being happy now, you have a saying. You can decide whether or not to feel happier or not. So when we look at how do we observe both things, so I'll just give you these two examples. This is about the wellness model. Again, is if you want to be happy, if you want to live longer, you just follow this model, or any other model, in fact. Work out your spiritual, your vocational, your emotional, and so on. You can find this model everywhere. But you can find many other models too. But it's the subjective perspective about happiness that makes a difference. And makes a difference because you can choose to be happy. Of course, you'll be affected by the context, but you can choose to be happy. I'll finish with an example of a very powerful book I read a few years ago by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And the book is about Viktor Frankl's own experience in the concentration camps in the Second World War. I don't know if you came across with this book. It's a very powerful book, but the message of the book is very similar to this one. Many people in those concentration camps, including one that is not far from here, when you went into those concentration camps, everything lost meaning to you. You were either saved by this official or you were sent to the final destiny. And Viktor Frankl's proposition is that some people just abandon themselves. They just let it go. And those people were the first ones to go. They just, they just lost hope. Whereas those who kept going, who kept believing, who kept having hope about the future, that someday that would finish, were the ones that survived, and survived with their mind more or less intact. So there is a choice. There is, something that you can choose regarding how to be happy. And time out. I'd like to thank you for listening to me, and of course I'm very happy to take your questions now. Thank you.
Of course, thank you for your presentation, and I have a question. Do you think that those two models can be, for a person, related with each other? And you can be like, can they be related, basically, the subjective one and the model you were talking about?
Well, they exist in you, right? So they're already related at the basis. The thing is that you shouldn't concentrate too much on what others tell you to be, how to be happy, right? You have to find your own way. You have to find your own path. And that's something that you have to work out every day. Of course, if you follow that wheel, right, wellness wheel, I think there is very likely that you will be happy. Yeah, I'm following that wheel, or other things as well. I'm working on, I'm reading an interesting book about how your genetics affect your longevity, right? And it's already written in our genes. We can't do much about it. But the book is written by a psychologist and biologist. And I'm now coming to the moment where the psychologist is writing, and apparently, although it's written in our genes, we can change some of the things we do in life, right? In order to, get better, get there longer and happier and so on, right? I would suggest you to do this exercise when you go back home today. Yeah. For those who have grandparents, I think it works also with parents, but if you have grandparents, and if they are like in their 70s, even 80s, ask them, what makes them happy? What makes an 80-year-old person happy? It's retired, no longer working. It's it's not making any profit, right? It's just lots of work with that person, but still, are they happy? I asked that to my granddad when he was 93, and I got a wonderful answer. You do that to your grandparents, and I'm sure you'll get wonderful answers.
Okay, thank you so much.
Is that the deal? Okay, don't forget that.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thanks a lot.